Ni har diplomet där, ni har blommor. Oj. Sakta men säkert. Det är ju god tid, vad gör det här? Oj. Vad gör det här? Exakt så. Sara?
Kristoff, oj.
Men
Jaha, ska vi dra igång? Tro. Ja. Låter väl som en bra plan. So I will switch to English. Warmly welcome to the European Commission's representation here in Sweden and to this what we call House of Europe or Europe House and this seminar. It's really a great pleasure to see so many of you daring the cold and coming into the warmth. And we will focus on climate and competitiveness, issues that never get old and boring. Always a new way of looking at them. And I will first express my gratitude to the 2030 Secretariat and Matthias Goldman, who initiated and has organized most of this seminar and together with us. But really a great thank you for taking this initiative. And also a great welcome. It's a fantastic pleasure to have Executive Vice President of the European Commission and Commissioner for Climate, previous Commissioner for Climate, Frans Timmermanns, with us, our main person here today, who we will hear from in a short while. A great pleasure. Well, just a few words. I mean, as many of you know, the EU has taken important steps in decisions in halting climate change. We have the 2030 targets to reduce with 55%, which we are on a good way of reaching. We have the 2050 targets for climate neutrality and rather recently the 2040 target of reducing with 90%. But we also have trends going a bit in the other way. The latest Eurobarometer, which is when Europeans are asked in a Europe-wide opinion poll, it showed that EU citizens want the EU to focus on defense and security and competitiveness in economy, which is not really surprising considering the global situation that we are in. But what's also interesting in that poll is that the Swedes are going in another direction. The Swedes also, of course, want to focus on security and defense, but number one is to promote and defend EU values and to combat climate change. So it is still here quite a fortress of other views. And that kind of made me wonder a bit. And I don't think I don't think the Swedes look differently on security and defense, because there is the great threat from the east in Sweden that the Swedes are very well aware of. And I don't think they're less concerned about competitiveness. Sweden is a very open economy, greatly dependent on export and import. So maybe it's just that one can see, or hopefully we can see, we can keep many thoughts at once and see that we can manage to maybe reinforce one priority with the other. I think at least that's my hope, that we can, if we can achieve the optimal win-win-win, so we can protect the climate by fostering the green transition, use the green transition as a catalyst for competitiveness, and capitalize on our competitiveness and green transition to ensure our resilience and our independence in order to strengthen the security and defense. And that, I hope, is the package that we can conclude, that we can see the climate debate and continue to move it forward, and in order for it not to be forgotten in this crisis mode that we are constantly in. And I think we will hear much more about this today. I'm quite sure about it. But you will not hear much more from me, because there are much more prominent people who will speak. And first I will give the floor to Matthias.
Thank you so much for that, Annika. Thank you for hosting us. Thank you for the very important work that you and your colleagues and the European Commission as a whole do to help us move further, faster together. My name is Matthias Goldman. I'm the CEO of the 2030 Secretariat, and I want to start by inviting you to a New Year's Eve party. Hopefully, on the New Year's Eve of 2030, we'll be able to have, together with our 96 2030 partners, a wonderful mission accomplished party for having reached the Swedish 2030 targets that parliamentarians have agreed upon, and for having reached the 2030 demands from the EU on Sweden and other member states. And I say hopefully, because when we discuss with our partners, is this going to happen? And when we look at our more than 90 indicators following what we're doing to reach those targets, we've seen that by and large we've been on track until recently. Recently, and I don't want to go into party politics or even national politics, but recently many say, well, we are a coalition of the willing and doing, but in order to be not only willing but also doing, we need to be sure that the framework is to be trusted. We need to be sure that we can rely on the decisions that have been taken, and that the decisions that are forthcoming are aligned with what we have been led to believe and that we want as citizens and industries and municipalities and so forth. If, at the very worst, we will not manage to have a mission accomplished party by last of December 2030, it may be as it is in some sports. You may need prolongation, you may even need penalty kicks, but our raison d'etre, the reason that we have the 2030 Secretariat and the reason that we have today's event, is that we have decided we're going to meet these targets. And that's why we need the discussion on how to combine that with competitiveness, how to build or perhaps even regain the trust in the decisions that we've taken so that we can all move further, faster together. And as a part of that, we are so excited to yearly, with the Jakob Lagercrantz Memorial Award, Jakob and I co-founded the 2030 Secretariat, yearly highlight the persons that are the biggest inspirations, the most important for us to be able to believe that yes we can and yes we will. And this year I'm incredibly honored, you mentioned him already, that Frans Timmermanns has accepted not only to be given the award but also to be here in person. And that is why I'm so excited to hand over the floor to Jakob's son and daughter to present the award to Frans Timmermanns.
Yeah.
Edith and Hjalte, please.
Thank you. Hey. Yeah, it's a real honor to be here, and not to take anything away from what's the focus, but no further ado, I will read the nomination to you. As Executive Vice President of the European Commission and the key driving force behind the European Green Deal, Frans Timmermanns has demonstrated political courage and a deep commitment to translating scientific urgency into concrete action. His work is the very definition of the values of the Jakob Lagercrantz Memorial Award, with integrity, perseverance, a creative approach, and the mindset needed to change our common future for the better. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm deeply honored. And I salute you and your father for his incredible work. I thank the 2030 Secretariat for this wonderful distinction. And if I may, I want to share a couple of thoughts with you about where we are and where we should be going. You know, it's wonderful. My daughter and I are now here in Stockholm. It's very cold. And, you know, my first thoughts last night and this morning were with these young men and women who are now on the fronts in their country fighting a Russian invasion in Ukraine in this cold, how they must be suffering a war that has been going on for 3 years, 11 months, and I think 17 days now, a war that is determined, is going to determine the outcome of this war, our collective European future. And in Sweden, people understand this extremely well. And I think one of the things we need to be looking at as Europeans is how we remain masters of our own destiny. And the world in which we live today, which is not going to go back to the comfortable world we have known before, the world is dictated by some big powers who want to put their terms on us. And obviously, this applies to China, but it applies also to the United States, sadly, is my conclusion. And I am afraid this is not going to change with a new president. I think the Rubicon has been crossed, and we as Europeans have the responsibility to be masters of our own destiny, and we can. The one thing that is holding us back is our division, is the lack of trust in each other. And we quickly need to find enough trust in each other to stand together and formulate some policies that will take us into a bright future. We sometimes underestimate the attractiveness of the European way of life. It is the most attractive way of life to most people on this planet, even to Americans and others, if they understand our social systems, our educational systems, our healthcare systems. And I think it is important that we put climate policy, the need for climate policy, in the context of the European way of life. I would urge the European Commission to rename the Green Deal into the Freedom Deal, because this is about European sovereignty. The only way we will be sovereign if we produce our own energy. The only European energy that we can produce that is sustainable is renewable energy coming from solar and wind mainly. The only way we cannot be blackmailed by other people delivering fossil fuels to us is to wean ourselves of the dependency on fossil fuels. This will be a huge profit to climate. It will create the necessary basis for a future European industry and European jobs in the sectors that will matter in the future, whether it's in automotive, whether it's in other parts of industry. And for that, we need to make our own electricity. If you look at China, they are adding 1,000 gigawatts of solar power every year. It's mind-boggling. We should have the ambition to add at least 500 gigawatts of solar power every year. If you look at what they're doing, electrifying their industry, they are overperforming also in climate. They are peaking out their emissions earlier than they had announced. China is the main reason why the world is moving more positively on climate than we had anticipated a couple of years ago. So, you know, there's some good news, not only bad news. And I think it is important that we understand as Europeans, we were climate leaders in the first von der Leyen Commission. We can still be climate leaders. And I truly believe that the urgencies that people feel today, which have much to do with our security and with, you know, also insecurities in the workplace, etc., it is our responsibility to show that this is linked with the climate crisis, that this is linked with the need for energy transition. This is linked with our ability to make sure that there's more social justice in climate justice. That, just transition will not happen if it's not just. And we have to be brutally honest about the fact that climate policies so far have profited the people most who need it least. So, if you are already well off, you have profited more from climate policy than people who are already struggling in other areas, who see the costs going up, but they don't see any benefits for them. And it's true. It's not a lie. So we need to make sure that, for instance, in housing, social housing gets absolute priority in creating climate neutral and more energy efficient housing. We should make sure that mobility for people becomes more accessible to people with lower incomes. This means the transformation of the European automotive industry needs to be sped up, not slowed down, as is happening today. Because people will vote with their bank accounts, and they will buy cheap Chinese electric cars if we don't make those cars ourselves. I mean, this is a no-brainer, and these are the things we should be looking at as Europeans. At the end of the day, we lack self-confidence. We lack the ability to create European unity. My biggest surprise, positive surprise in the last months, and ironically enough we have Trump to thank for that, is that even the more radical right movements in Europe, they might challenge the Green Deal, but they don't challenge Europe anymore. It's a good starting point. And I think this will be a good basis to create more European unity. And with more European unity, and I would especially want a European capital union, we can create a stronger Europe that is master of its own destiny. And I hope that people who work on the climate crisis, Jakob is one of them, Matthias is another one, and so many inspiring people in Sweden understand that if we can show the interlinkages between these subjects, the climate crisis might not be on top of the agenda, but tackling the climate crisis will also help us tackle the other issues. And with that, I yield the floor. I don't want to speak for too long. I have so many more things to say, but it would be unfair to all of you to continue speaking any longer. Thank you very much.
Frans, let me insist on keeping you here a little bit longer. Then we're going to have the panel. Then we're going to hopefully have you back for a few final words. But I know that many people are wondering, what are you doing these days?
Yeah, good question. I've left national politics in November for various reasons. First of all, because I lost the elections. It's a good reason. And also because it was clear to me that we need a new generation also in Dutch politics. I'll be 65 in May. I'm still full of energy, and I'm going to continue working for at least 10 more years. But I also, I saw the signs that people wanted a younger generation to take over, and I gladly stepped aside to make that possible. In the meanwhile, I've been asked to do several things. I've been honored by you. I'm now working on, I'm also a Russia expert from a long, long time. I'm working on some projects to see if we can identify a possible road out of this misery and what the relationship with Russia in the future could possibly be. These things need planning and need some careful thought. Many universities are now asking for me to come and lecture. I'd love to do that as well.
I'm like thinking, do something bigger.
Well, I might, but it takes time.
Right.
It's only been 2 months, and I need to take time to see the opportunities. But I think I still have a lot to do, and I hope I can make myself useful. I've been working for exactly 40 years now, and everything I've done is in the public sphere, public service. I was a soldier, I was a diplomat, I was a member of parliament, I was a minister several times, and I was a European commissioner. And I want to put that experience at the service of our society. That is my inspiration.
And you briefly alluded to your experience with Russia. You've known Putin since the 90s.
Yes. I got to know him personally when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. Some of you might know that there was a mayor at the time who was very, very popular, also in Sweden, Anatoly Sobchak, and everybody wanted a meeting with Sobchak. But to get a meeting with Sobchak, you needed to go through Putin, and you needed to create the special circumstances that would allow people to get access to Sobchak. That's how I got to know him. And the funny thing is, I was so proud that I had learned Russian in the Dutch army that I wanted to talk Russian to him. But he was so proud of his German that he talked German back to me.
And building on that experience, Russia is tremendously important from a global perspective, but it's also almost our neighbor. Where do you see Russia heading?
Well, I say with great humility that us Russia experts, we always make predictions and they never materialize concretely. I remember as a young diplomat, I predicted the demise of the Soviet Union, and my ambassador said, for heaven's sake, don't send that to The Hague, it's the end of your career. And then all the experts say, no, the Soviet Union will not disintegrate. And then when it did, the same expert all said unisono, it was inevitable that it was going to happen. So that's the nature of, but still we need to analyze. We need to do everything to help Ukraine overcome this crisis and, in my view, to win this war. But at the same time, we need to be thinking about what is the future of our relationship with Russia. And that is going to be a very, very complicated issue to tackle. And I think we need to put our energy into that, thinking about that.
And where does that lead you?
Well, it leads me to a couple of conclusions. First of all, Russia is not going to go away. It's our neighbor. I don't need to say that in Sweden, but sometimes I need to say it in Southern Europe more clearly. Secondly, Russia has created a war economy, and a war economy lasts for at least a decade after the end of the war. And the war economy is a source of huge instability, both nationally and internationally. So we will have a hugely unstable Russia at our border for a long, long time. Thirdly, politics in Russia has been so personified in one person. That one person at some day will disappear. That will also lead to chaos because there is no bedrock upon which the new powers have been built. So you can look at the attempt on the deputy head of GU, which is the Russia Military Intelligence Service. He was shot on a high floor of an apartment of his lover. But where does this come from? There is instability in the system there as well. And Putin is keeping it all together like a sort of planetary system. But if you take out the sun of a planetary system, planets will collide. And so that will also be a source of instability from Russia. And at the same time, the Chinese are very, they have the time. They always have had the time. There's a famous saying of Chiang Kai-shek when he was asked, what's the effect of the French Revolution? He said, too early to tell.
And that was 150 years later.
150 years later. So they have the time, and they are going to step by step try and make Russia into their vassal state. And this has huge implications for European security as well. They've been humiliated by the Russians over the centuries so badly, they're going to take their revenge now that they can. This is how I read the situation. And that is also a challenge to Europe. So these are the trends I see. And then we have to extrapolate from these trends. What does that mean for the policy making we do not right now? We are undervaluing think tanks. We are undervaluing the scientific community that could contribute to this. We are living too much day by day. And that's hurting climate policy, but it's also hurting some of the geopolitical choices we need to make as Europeans.
And in geopolitics, a lot of us are also counting the days. It's now 3 years and 2 more weeks, and then Trump is over. Is it over?
No. Trump is extrapolating some of the trends we've seen for a long time in the United States. They want to disengage from European security from a long time. The only big difference that cannot be undone is Trump destroying the international system that was based on the American prerogative for 80 years. And the one thing Trump, Xi Jinping and Putin have in common is that they 100% personalize government. So it's no longer the institutions that dictate the room of maneuver of the leadership. It's the leadership that dictates the one man, it's always a man, that dictates the limits within which the institutions can work. This is what Xi Jinping is doing in China. The Communist Party, who has become sort of the bedrock of the Chinese bourgeoisie, is being completely controlled by him. The armed forces are being completely controlled by him, which has never happened to this extent before. Trump is trying to do the exact same thing, and he will partially succeed. And I find it very difficult, with a new American president coming in, that president will relinquish the power that has been concentrated in the president's hands. You know, take Poland for an example. I mean, I've had a huge fight with the peace government in Poland when I was responsible for the rule of law, death threats, etc. All this happened. The way I could convince Jean-Claude Juncker to be tough on Poland was to say, whatever they do will have to be undone by a future government if they lose the elections. And undoing it, they're liable to use the same instruments that were created to do it. So the act against state capture, as we call it in science, state capture, that is political parties taking over state institutions, once it's done, it's extremely difficult to undo. And you see how the Polish government is struggling to get the judiciary to be independent again. And at the same time, you see that a sentiment was created in the population that there is a market for this sort of politics. And that market will not go away. Peace could still win the next election in Poland, whatever they did. And, MAGA could still be a force to reckon with in the American politics, even after Trump.
And the geopolitical trends that you paint for us here, is there an upside for this renewable switch, for the climate mitigation? Can we use this to our benefit somehow?
Well, we need to zoom in on what's happening on the ground. And I have already mentioned China, but you should also look at the United States. Their transition is going at lightning speed. There's so much solar being created in Texas, of all places, not just California and other places. The electrification of the American economy, because it's driven on AI and tech, is going at a lightning speed, and they know they need renewable energy for that. There's going to be controversies. These data centers, they don't get enough electricity out of renewables and gas and oil, and they're now using very, very dirty energy sources to keep them going, and local authorities are going to resist that. So they will invest more massively in renewables in the years to come. So if you look into the reality of the economics, it's not that bad. The only thing that I worry about is that the political rhetoric is scaring off investors, because we need massive investment right now, and the political rhetoric is causing a problem for investment decisions in Sweden and in Europe, all over the place. And this is something we need to address urgently, to make clear, okay, we might have some things, we want differently. We might change the pace in some of the things we do, but we stick to our goals, and our goals remain our goals. That would be such an incredible message to investors who, by the way, would love to invest in Europe because they are not so sure about the United States anymore. And there's so much capital in the world looking for an outlet. And now they are investing very often in things we need to be worried about. The most investment, if you look at, for instance, the Gulf states, is in media, film industry, etc., because that's the way to influence narrative and public perceptions. And rather, I would like to see them invest in the industries of the future, industrial production and energy transition, etc. So investment opportunities are huge. For this, we urgently need, and this I draw from Draghi and Letta, we urgently need a European Capitals Union. That is now hampering a lot of investment. We need that so that investors have the security that when they invest in one member state, they are in fact investing in the whole EU area.
Just help us understand how that could materialize given the political situation of the European Union.
Well, I think the European Commission should be bold and say, you all applauded Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi for their reports. Now here are 5 proposals to transmit that into concrete policies. And by the way, these are not directives, these are regulations. So we'll make life easier for you. You don't have to transform that in national legislation. You can apply it directly. I think that would be my move.
I want to share with you briefly when I was last in the Netherlands. I was chairing and don't care too much about the details, but I was chairing the Advanced Biofuels Forum. They were all the manufacturers of advanced biofuels for the maritime and aviation sector and so forth. And then there were all the investors, the banks and the financial institutions. And largely thanks to you and the Green Deal, there's the Fuel EU Maritime, there's the Refuel EU Aviation, where year by year the quota is going to be increased, creating a market. So I just said to the participants of the conference, here we have the producers, here we have the money. Get together, sign the contracts. And all the investors said, no, it's not bankable because we don't trust that the target's already been decided by EU, the legislation that's already there, that it's going to stick. And I don't want us to talk about aviation fuel or shipping fuel, but the more general picture that we worry that what you decided is not necessarily something that the EU is going to stick to. How do we deal with that?
Well, the problem is, I mean, I had personal experience. If you talk too much about the long term, you lose the next election. That is one of the problems we have in Europe today. Short-termism is crippling us. And if you look at the biggest member states of the European Union, look at the electoral instability in Germany, electoral instability in France, electoral fake stability in Italy. Look at a Spanish prime minister whom I think is very courageous, but he's not been able to have a budget adopted in his parliament for years now. This is the level of instability that creates understandable short-termism with politicians. You know, I paid a price for this, so I'm not criticizing it. I understand, you know, you're just trying to win the next election, but by trying to do that, you lose eye on the ball. You just look at, you know, the couple of centimeters in front of your feet, and you lose direction of where you're going. And that is, I think, one of the biggest European problems we have today. And then, of course, the new opium of the people is nostalgia. You know, you sell people an image of the past that is so wonderful, and you promise that you'll take them back to that past where everybody was white, and etc. All that nonsense. And that's creating a sort of a collective amnesia for the real problems we would need to face. And that amnesia is like, you know, being drunk. It's nice. You don't have to think about your problems a bit, but it's also totally irresponsible.
I am
on this positive note.
Yes, on this positive note. That's why you got me. I want to share with you how I discussed with Jakob's daughter yesterday. Because Jakob would forever always mention Timmermans. I was like, enough.
Yeah,
but
I agree.
but somehow you created a Green Deal, and the reason we all align it with you is partially a great honor to share the stage with you, but it also shows to me that even in such a big context as the European Union, individuals can make a difference.
Yeah, okay. But let's be honest here. I had the most amazing team in my cabinet with people, really good people. I had, you know, the European Commission, whatever you might think of it, it's the best civil service around in the world. And we had amazing people. You know, if you look at the emissions trading system, perhaps there are 10 people in the European Commission who really understand it. The rest of the world doesn't. But they apply it because they like it, because it makes them money and it helps them transform. But I had these amazing people working for me. And then I had this huge support in the European Parliament, because you can't do anything without the European Parliament in the Commission. And I had, Jutta is here, but you had many other European members of Parliament who did this incredible work together with us. You know, sometimes, especially when it goes to nature protection, we won votes with 1 or 2 votes difference, and we went, you know, 751. We went to every individual member of Parliament to try and convince them to vote for us. So, yes, my head was prominently showered with glory for a while, and then attacked constantly since then for being the figurehead of the Green Deal. But none of this was possible without a huge collaboration. I have to remind the center-right, and especially Manfred Weber, you voted for all of this. Everything you're now fighting, you voted for. And why did we get the votes? Because there were benefits on all sides. And that's the art of the deal. That you negotiate, you create majorities. That's democracy. And yes, I was for a while, when it was popular, of course, the Green Deal was von der Leyen's. But then when it became unpopular, it became mine. Fine, but we did this collectively, and you know, once you have the European Parliament on board, it becomes more difficult for the Council, for the member states, to say no. They will then also start to negotiate. And then, of course, sometimes you propose a horse and what comes out is a camel because you've negotiated, but at least something comes out of the system. So the system works if you work collectively. And that is my experience. And thank you for saying that it was all my doing, but I have to be very honest, it was a doing of a lot of people with a lot of talent, a lot of determination, and a lot of willingness to come to compromises.
Thank you. It was, but how is the Green Deal doing these days?
Well, I said earlier, I'm reminded of something that John Major once said of his discussions with Boris Yeltsin, where he asked, Boris, tell me, in one word, how's Russia doing? And Yeltsin said, good. And then Major waited and said, well, is that all you're going to say? Couldn't you expand a bit more, use a few more words? And then Yeltsin looked at him and said, not good. And this is what you could say about the Green Deal. The essence, the Fit for 55, it's still there and it's going on and member states are working on it, etc. So that's the good part. But the not good part is that the rhetoric is so anti-Green Deal right now that this is scaring off investors and is creating a perception in the public that it's all bad and that it's all, just fun and games for these lefty dreamers who are not being affected by it anyway. So that's not good. So the matter of fact is good, but in politics, rhetorics matter. And the rhetorics are starting to undermine all of this. And if we don't find new rhetorics, and I would say link it to the Industrial Revolution, link it to our security situation, link it to the European way of life, link it to our sovereignty, and then you have a different debate.
Frans, you've been in Sweden many times. It's great to have you back. Just before this, you had a roundtable with the best of Swedish industry, of Swedish civil society and municipalities. But you know more, you know these guys, but you also know Sweden since a long time back. What's your view on Sweden when it comes to climate mitigation?
Well, first of all, let me say something about, and don't take this wrong, I'll be blunt, but that's the privilege of being Dutch. You can always find an excuse to be blunt. But, I was at the Commission, I was in the cabinet of a European Commissioner in 1995 when Sweden joined the European Union. And from that on, I was always, Sweden is half in, but also half out. You know what I mean? Emotionally, half in, half out. We have Putin and Trump to thank for the fact that Sweden is now fully in. And that is my first conclusion. Sweden is now fully in, and Sweden is leading more because it's fully in. Denmark learned that lesson before. Denmark was for a long time half in and half out and never could get anything done. Once Denmark committed fully to the EU, they could get things done. And this is what I see for Sweden right now. You can get more things done. And especially in terms of our long-term security, energy transition, climate policy, Sweden could still take the leadership. But I would like to see Sweden do more of that. Be more vocal, be more present in Europe, be more clear about what Sweden's choices are, try and create more alliances with other more like-minded countries. And Sweden is taking such a big responsibility for our collective security. That is bankable, to put it in very blunt terms. Bankable in terms of your political credibility on the European level. And Sweden should join other Northern European countries in talking to Spain and Italy and Portugal and others and saying, listen, what's happening in Ukraine, that's also your responsibility and you better pay up like we do. And then they could ask something in return from us in the North and the West. So I would like to see this clear Swedish commitment to the EU that I see now move into a next phase of also acting upon it and be more visible, if I may be so bold and frank, more visible, more active, just show what Sweden has to offer and just, be at the table, not just listening, but talking.
In the room where we just had the roundtable discussion, the EU, a couple of weeks back, had the Commission, the very civil servants you mentioned, the best and the brightest of the civil servants of the Commission, going through the EU climate and energy recommendations to Sweden and saying, well, Sweden is not necessarily fully on track to meet the targets and demands that we put on ourselves, and the EU decided as sharing between the member states. How do you view Sweden's climate actions? You can be blunt, you're amongst friends.
Yeah. Well, the only thing more general I would like to say is what I try to say. I have been in government several times with the centre-right. In in the European level governance, we did everything. Nothing could happen without the centre-right on board. So all we did was with the centre-right. It really pains me to see the centre-right cater so much to the radical right and the extreme right, because it's undermining their position, it's making them weaker. Of course, if you play the game, it's nice to have an alternative in Europe, that you don't have to exclusively deal with the liberals and the social democrats. You can also go through the alternative route of the radical right. I don't even have too much of a problem with that. But to think that you can be stronger by adopting the rhetoric of the radical right, the policies of the radical right, I think is misconstrued. It's going to weaken you, and it's going to bolster the position of the radical right. And now I would say, who am I? But still, as an outsider to the center right, Trump has given you an opportunity to distance yourself from the radical right and point to them and say, you are the ones undermining European sovereignty and national sovereignty because of your alliance with people like Trump. And we are the ones coming up for our sovereignty, and we will distance ourselves from your policies. It's an opportunity, but I don't see them doing that. And so in conclusion, what you ask me, well, how do you see Sweden? Frankly, I believe the government could be doing more on climate, but they are listening too much to the song coming out of the radical right, as though climate policy or the Green Deal would be bad for industry and bad for the population. I think they know better. The Prime Minister knows better, if I may say so.
Frans, we're going to ask you to come back and wrap this session up. But before that, this is, and also including all those in the cameras who is watching all over Sweden and elsewhere, this is the movers and shakers when it comes to reaching the climate targets we agreed upon. Challenge us. What do you want from us?
Well, I think, people are switching off when the challenges become so overwhelming that they don't want to hear them or see them, and then they start to compartmentalize, look at one issue. And the art of us getting people to change that attitude is to not be shy about the tremendous challenge we face, but also not be shy about the fact that we can face it and we can solve these issues and show the interlinkages between the two, and also show a bit what's happening in the rest of the world. If you see the electrification of Africa and the way that's going, it's remarkable. I'm not even talking just about China. If you see what's happening in the rest of the world, it should be an inspiration to us. And so, let's help people embrace a better future. It's what made us strong as Europeans, and it could make us strong again if we are only willing to see it.
What an incredible honor. Frans Timmermanns.
Thank you. Thank you, Mattias. Thank you.
And let's now turn Frans' wise words into concrete action with a panel that is free of Sweden's very finest industries and free of Sweden's very finest politicians. On this table, I'm going to ask up Anja Almdar, who's the Director of Public and Regulatory Affairs at Vattenfall. Please give her a warm hand. And when I ask you to give each and every one of the speakers a warm hand, it's because it's been scientifically proven that not only do you feel good getting an applaud, but you also actually feel good applauding someone. So we all feel better the more we applaud. The other one I want you to applaud is Lisa Lindqvist, who's the Public Affairs Manager at Scania. And on the business side, also Marlene Burvik, who's Head of Public and Regulatory Affairs of ST1, ST1. And we're soon going to introduce the politicians. We're just going to let them wait a little bit and just start with the business sector. Starting with you, Anja, in this order. Your first reflections on all the wise words from Frans.
It was very inspiring to listen to, I must say, and I agree to much of it, almost all of it. I think very many put competitiveness, security, and climate against one another. But I think the question that needs to be asked is, can Europe compete long-term in a fossil-based economy? And I say no to that, since we import 90% of the fossil fuels that we use, and to a cost that is several times higher than it is in China and in the US. So if that is not sustainable long-term, then the question we need to ask ourselves is, how fast can we decarbonize to the lowest possible cost? Because I also have great respect for the cost issue that you also mentioned, and the effect that it has on households and people's everyday lives.
Thank you. Lisa?
Well, I reflected upon, you mentioned a lack of self-confidence in Europe right now when sort of setting the direction on how to solve the challenges that we're in. And I think that this is also true for transport decarbonization, which is the area that it most relates to what I'm doing. I'm from the vehicle manufacturing side of the truck manufacturer Scania. And this is a paradox, really. I mean, for some reason, we hesitate on the decarbonization of the transport sector. And this is hard to understand why, because Europe is a superpower when it comes to vehicle manufacturing. We make the vehicles that everyone in the world wants to buy. Basically, we're technology leaders and we have all the preconditions. We know how to do this in an electrified way as well. And we are sure that we can. The only thing that we need is, of course, the precondition to scale these solutions. But this is really a very clear case of decarbonizing a sector that leads to a society and a life for everyone that is better than what we're used to. So, I mean, our thought is really about this paradox of low self-esteem in this sense. We really feel that we need to get going because we have a lot of potential to take home and make benefits out of, from a European perspective, but also from a Swedish perspective, of course.
Thank you, Lisa. Marlene?
Yes, one reflection is how quick the world can change. So quick. I remember it was like yesterday when we were working with the Green Deal, and the future was much brighter than it feels today, and then everything changes. And I also think what you talk about how we should act in Europe and what's dividing us, and I think that now more than ever, both politicians and the business need to be brave, need to keep the goals that we have set, and also need to be brave and say that we can manage this, because I do believe we can do that together. But I think that the divisions that we have in the society, it's very it works against us, and it makes everyone afraid. But it's just also that everything can change so quickly. It's scary, but it's also it's very nice to hear you, and you give hope.
Can we hear from the three of you, and starting with you, Marlene, some of the Green Deal decisions, and the Green Deal obviously led to other legislations. What has it meant for you as businesses in order to move forward towards a fossil-free, renewable, climate-friendly economy?
For us, it means everything, I would say. We are an energy company that wants to lead the energy transition. So for us, we take all our decisions in the Green Deal. When it comes to the role of biogas, that we think is extremely important in several sectors, but also to produce the fuels that we need to make the refuel aviation and maritime succeed. So I would say that everything is based on that, but also this fear now that this can change is something that hinders us today.
Thank you. Lisa, your perspective.
Well, the same goes for the transport sector and the automotive industry, of course. I mean, we have the CO2 standards for vehicle manufacturers stating that we have to sell certain amounts of zero-emission vehicles. That is very important. There is also the ETS2, of course, which is a very important framework and needs to have a sort of solid direction going forward. We have to be sure that this will remain in place in the future as well. So there's a lot here. It's the AFIR regulation of charging infrastructure, which is of course a critical enabler of our possibilities to scale electrification throughout the European Union. But that said, it's also clear that when we have ambitious EU demands and targets in place, it's also very clear that it needs to be complemented by member state policy measures that match the ambition level set by the EU. And we're currently experiencing a gap here in several member states.
That's going to be my follow-up question. But first you on the importance of Green Deal and so forth.
Yeah, and I would like to continue on what I said before on how to decarbonize as fast as possible to the lowest possible cost. And I think there are many things you need to think about, but I'd like to bring up 3 perspectives on that. And the first thing is the importance of clear and reliable targets, to know where we are heading. And I think you talked a lot about that too, that of course clear set goals, but also that politicians use their voice to make sure to everyone that they will remain. Like talk is cheap, you can say. I think Svante Axelsson heading the Fossil-Free Sweden, that institution, very often says that talk is cheap, but it's really important for companies such as ours and for the society to know that this direction that we believe is inevitable, this is the direction we will be going. And the second thing is a value chain perspective. We are transforming a society, and we need to make sure that the whole value chain transforms at the same time. And for example, if you would have policy that promotes electricity production, but there are bottlenecks in the grids, it doesn't really help us. Or if there is no demand, once you have solved the bottlenecks and you have the production, then you have that challenge. So you always need to bring a value chain perspective, and we try to do that as well as Vattenfall in forming partnerships and trying to move together to lower risks and thereby also lowering costs. And the third thing is you need to focus on sound business cases, like the low-hanging fruits. And this is also really important from an EU and from a policy-making perspective. Like, where can you move to the lowest cost the fastest? Direct electrification, the transport industry, for example. And in Sweden, we have remarkable prerequisites for fossil-free steel, as an example.
Lisa, you already alluded to the role of Sweden as a country, and I'm sure that Sweden is not the only country within the European Union where some people question, is there still a room or a need for national policy or national targets? What's your view on that?
Well, we experience, as I said, a gap between EU ambitions and demands and member state policies as well. I mean, for the vehicle industry, we have the EU CO2 standards on vehicles. They stipulate that we need to sell some 35% zero-emission vehicles by 2030. Last year, that number was 1.5% BEVs, electric vehicles sold, heavy trucks sold in the EU in total. And we got 3 more years to go. So this is a challenging case, to say the least. And the reason to why we are not on better numbers as of today is because member state policies for decarbonization of the transport sector do not meet up to the pace set by the EU demands and targets. So in a Swedish context, for example, we have experienced during the last couple of years weakened competitiveness for the electric alternative compared to fossil-driven vehicles, for example. And that is concerning given the very strict demands that we have put on ourselves on EU level, which is good. But member states need to do more to secure that the industry can actually fulfill the demands, because this is where we're at right now. We don't have the enabling conditions in place to keep the pace that we wanted and that EU stipulates us to do.
And Marlene, you're a Finnish company in Sweden. What's the role of the national state within this?
Yeah, we're a Finnish company, and also in Sweden, and then also in Norway. It's not a member of the European Union, so we have difficulties in all countries, I would say. But I totally agree what you are saying. I think it's extremely important that we have the support system also, and that is in the hand of the governments, so we are able to fulfill the targets that are set by the EU level. So I think that is very, very important, and I think also to understand the market and why things are happening and why it's not happening, perhaps. So and also to decide to go in from the state and also regulate, or if it's a support system, what's needed, so we can help each other to reach the goals.
And Anja, Vattenfall is fully owned by the Swedish state, so one would think that they would give you the opportunity to rise and shine here. Are they?
I mean, we are a commercial company just like any other company. We are just owned by the state, so all prerequisites for the market are the same for us as for everyone else. But I think I really respect that. Like, if you look back 7 years ago or something like that, it was more of like a hallelujah feeling when it came to climate change, and it was all positive, and we're going to do that. And then, of course, when reality starts to hit, it's not as easy. That's why we often say that. I mean, the direction is clear, but the pace might not be. It might be bumps on the road, and I think the important thing is not to lose track of the direction when you do that, and to solve what's coming up. I think very often I can go back to the value chain perspective, that everything, of course, wasn't all thought through. When you set certain targets and then you discovered, for example, it feels like, for example, the grid bottlenecks, that was something one hadn't really thought through from the start. So I think it's really important to not change the direction, not change the target, but to address the real issues on the way, but also make sure that you respect that this is not easy. It's not something that's going to be a räkmacka, that we say in Sweden.
And building on that räkmacka, we now turn to our dear politicians. It's a great thing having been a politician, but no longer being a politician, because that means that I can recognize when I see the best and the brightest and the finest of our politicians around. These are the three that I keep thinking of. We got, and give them each a round of applause when they come up. Christopher Fjellner from the Moderate Party, former MEP, former leader of Miljömålsberedningen. We got Jytte Guteland from the Swedish Parliament, Social Democrats. And we have Martin Nordahl from Centerpartiet. And in the order that you just came up, you're going to be able to give a double reflection on what we heard from France and on what we heard from the business community. Christopher, you go first.
First of all, I'd just like to say, I think to start to set some perspective on our climate action and our climate ambition, I might not be as impressed with China as Mr. Timmermans was, certainly mainly due to their, how to say, global footprint and actions outside of China as well, and a little bit more worried with the US, maybe, than Mr. Timmermans. But if we take a step back, I still think it's true that Sweden is still spearheading and leading the way for Europe. It was manifested with, for example, our new climate targets, where all 8 political parties said we want to achieve 60% to 2030. You know, all parties in the Swedish parliament agreed to that. Then, Europe is definitely still leading the way for the world, I think. To a large extent, Mr. Timmermans' achievement. And it's still true that if the rest of the world would do the Fit for 55, what we have committed to do, we would have solved the issue at hand. And I think you have to keep that in perspective. Because if I look back, I entered the European Parliament 2004. And if you can see the consistency, if you take a step back, the fact that we've been on the same trajectory, how consistent and how it's, of course, there's been bumps in the road, but if you take a step back, it's pretty remarkable. I left 2019 and can see that the people that took up the tasks after me are still more or less on the same route. And therefore, I think the most important message we can send to investors, to the companies is, of course, there will be bumps in the road, but it's the best you can do is bet on Europe, because Europe has delivered so far incredibly well. And therefore, that's the best case to believe that we will do it in the future as well. I think you have to start with that, because often you get so upset with some little change of 5% 1 year here or there that you forget the big picture. And I think this is the big picture.
Thank you, Christopher. Jutta, please.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak after Frans and to listen to you again. It's incredible, and it's a leadership that we need today. So I would fully welcome you to come back to politics immediately. And I also think that you proved once again that you definitely know what's needed in the time we live in. And that said, I would say as a comment to that, first of all, I think it is a freedom deal. So definitely we need to preserve and make sure that we keep on the track for the transition. And it is doing also Europe more independent and secure. And we need to combine it. And it's been said here also after that it is from the companies that it is a combination of climate and being in the front when it comes to technology. That's the superpower of Europe, and we need to believe in it and understand that that is what's going to make us great, not listen to the US nostalgic agenda that Mr. Trump is using. And that said, on my other comment is the nostalgic political discussion that we have. I absolutely agree with that's the case, and it's very dangerous. And if you look at Sweden and our history and see what made us successful, we were never nostalgic. We were the country that really wanted to move ahead. We were building our success story because we have had a success story, and it's possible for us to continue to lead in the future. For us, it has always been get rid of the old jobs, the bad conditions, make sure that we invest in the future. We don't want competition based on poor environment condition for the employers. We don't want low salaries. We want to have a competition based on knowledge, investment in what's the future. And we need to be nostalgic. That's what we need to go back to, our principles. That's not nostalgic. That's about the future. And then I also thought about what Frans said about investment. And when we look at what I hear constantly now as an MP, I hear companies saying that they hesitate, and also that they are afraid because they invested a lot and they don't see the political leadership now that's helping the environment for the future, for those companies who did right, who invested in the Green Deal. They hear other things. And then I will go into my very short, also my what I would like to give as my advice. And that is, we need now an election where climate is very integrated in the discussion. Because I had, even though I'm very young, I've been elected 3 times for parliament, and I've been in the European Parliament two times election movement. My first one, we talked about everything in the election movement, 2014. It was about the franchise, about how the labor market functions, internal market, about crisis, about everything. Knowledge, facts about who is prime minister there and there, nothing about climate. And then it was actually, I was always having my debates in the night. So often with my kid, because everyone has went out of the parliament. Only Frans was maybe there, talking to my kids sometimes. I don't know if you remember. My second election movement, Then climate was in focus. Everyone spoke about it. After IPCC reports, after Greta Thunberg, it was everywhere. We had a climate movement in that election. And then we got the Green Deal. We got the climate law. We got France in the Commission leading this. And I really believe that's what we need in this election movement in Sweden. We need again to focus, to make sure that we have that mobilization. So
Thank
that's
you.
my little election speech.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
it is working. No, I was about to talk about, the industry leading the way, but now I'm afraid the first thing I have to say is, Mr. Timmermans, I know the feeling about losing an election on short-termism, and to Matthias, we are also counting the days, Christopher, 218 days. and
I'm
we're
also
over.
counting the days.
We lost exactly on the same thing, the last election. That is, we were far ahead, as we should be, but people were right here about their fuel prices. Yeah. And now we're everywhere in a very defensive position, because there are other things going on also, as mentioned by Mr. Timmermans. And in this position where it's really refreshing to hear the kind of still this forward thrust that Mr. Timmermans has on those policies and the industry. Also a very new cast now. Before it used to be the activists who were for climate and industry a bit against. Now it's like industry is for and the activists are against. But anyway, right now, yeah, we're in election campaign. Right now, I think it's enormously important that somebody shows leadership. I'm really worried when Lisa says that people are, or it was maybe Marlene, we're not putting the money on the table because we don't really trust the politicians. We have two fantastic things that Mr. Timmermans mentioned. The carbon price, you maybe missed that part, but it was very important, and I still hold to that. The second thing, we have the realization that you started with, that there's no security without energy independence. So it's like we have no choice on that, in that dimension. But looking myself, like my colleagues here, into this election campaign, we have to make people remember and put up this pride of the Swedish green trademark, European green trademark, about being the leaders, that it has opportunities, that it means billions of investment and future. This is one of the central things. But the other one, I think, which is absolutely essential, because we had years of setbacks here in Sweden. Increased emissions, changed competitiveness for green alternatives, also investments that have gone wrong for business reasons, but also for policy reasons, is to remind people that green can be cheap. That's simple.
Thank you,
It
Martin.
can be cheaper. So I think those are the two. I have many more takeaways from Mr. Timmermans, but those are things that I take with me.
Thank you. I want to ask you all three, and starting with you, Christopher. Lately, we've seen that the 2027 start for ETS became 2028. We've seen that the 100% EVs became 90%. We've seen all the omnibuses and so forth. Are these acceptable or even unavoidable reality checks, or are we backtracking in a way that we cannot afford?
I felt that I was a little bit too positive in the beginning there, saying that, Europe is fantastic, Sweden is fantastic, everything is going fantastic. But I think still it's important to convey that message, because the big picture is, as you say with the carbon pricing, for example, this is what's going to happen. It's going to be this way. So therefore, do the investment, it will pay off, But there are worries, and you point at one of them. I would though start with another, because I have three worries. The first worry I have is the biggest threat, I think, to the European climate action and leadership is actually our underperformance of our economy, because that makes the rest of the world look to other directions. And we can't mobilize the cash we need to actually do the whole thing. Therefore, I was very happy that we are talking about the Capital Markets Union, for example. I think that's probably one of the most important climate actions we can take in Europe. That's the first thing that I'm worried about. consistent economic underperformance. The second one is public support. And I think you alluded to some extent. And I've been through so many elections where I wanted to speak about one thing, but the electorate wanted to speak about something else. And when you don't do that, you lose. The customer is always right. Sometimes you are a little bit, provoked by the electorate, but you know what? They're also right. And I remember Jean-Claude Juncker, his famous quote is that we all know what we have to do, but we don't know how to be re-elected after we've done it. And therefore, I think that it's also connected to economy and economic underperformance, of course. But therefore, I think it's important to not see some of these things as major setbacks, because to some extent, the European Union has been good at letting off some of the steam when people has become a little bit too upset about things, but keeping the pace and direction. Where we really failed, for example, in migration and other areas or security, then we've said, we bet everything on this, and we do this even if we see that we can't really succeed, and then the whole table is turned, and we lose everything. So therefore, I'm not that worried if it's 90 instead of 100, because it will be 100 a year or two later. But I'm more worried if we're not responsive enough to the electorate, so that they actually, the Gilets jaunes becomes a European movement forever. That will hurt us more. The third thing I just want to mention is the balkanization of globalization, I think is tremendously, because that makes it hard for us to collect the brightest and the smartest of the world in a collective effort to solve this, and it will hurt the economies worldwide to actually be able to solve this truly common and global problem. So those are the worries for our achievements, I would say. But I don't put your question as one of my main worries. I think it's a part of European success, keeping the pace, but letting some steam off from time to time.
Jutta, is it letting steam off, or what is it?
I would first of all say that when I listen to Christopher, I'm still getting the impression that you might not be that worried, and I would not be that worried either if you were leading the climate policy in your party. But Christopher Fjellner is not.
I kind of.
And it is a little bit like we also heard from Frans earlier, that we had a very good cooperation between the center-right groups in the European Parliament, and we are both children of that cooperation, and that's what we learned how to work. And we also had great cooperation in recent years in Sweden when we speak about these questions, since we work together. But the situation is that we don't have that anymore. Not in the European Parliament. I was back in January. I was deeply worried about how it functions today, because EPP doesn't negotiate with Renew, the Liberal group. They doesn't cooperate with us. They can do it if they get all their interest, but they don't want to negotiate. They turn to the radical right, and that's for sure. And also what I see back home here in Sweden, it's the same. And since you and your party become so dependent on them, you end up in their knee, and that is weakening you. And in the long run, it's a strategy doomed to death. So please tell that. And for us, we become in constant opposition when it comes to these questions. And that is not good, because we have an idea. We have strategy for the future, for Sweden, for Europe. And we know that the companies needs to invest in the future. They don't need to go back. We will lose jobs. We already see it. So what our message is actually very strong. Then I get a bit worried when you say that the activists are not out there and it's the companies that wants the climate policies today. That's a difference. We had Greta Thunberg, we had Friday for Future back then. We don't now. But and that's my final message. We have the majority of the people still. When we look at the polls, we see that the majority, both in Sweden and in the other countries in Europe, They want more climate action, not less. So it's not true that we have a population that is resistant or negative. They want us to do the leadership and continue with the Green Deal. They want more climate justice, and they want more action and more ambition. So that's what we see in the polls. So this handshake between the radical right and the normal right is very not beneficial for people's opinion.
Thank you, Jutta. We're going to hear Martin, and then after that I want you to briefly allude to Sweden's role, because you both, all three had very central positions in defining Sweden's role vis-a-vis the European Union, and then we're going to turn to businesses and ask the businesses, what do you want from our esteemed politicians, and see if we can get that handshake that you just talked about, Jutta. Martin first.
Please be very, have all your demands front and center so that we feel the pressure.
Good.
Yes, no, it's all, it's like a cliche, but it's all about leadership. And Sweden is absolutely central. It is one of the few countries that have proven consistently that you can have strong growth and reduced emissions. And the situation now when we have low growth and higher emissions is very, very bad for leadership in Europe. And we have to return to have this leadership role for our green trademark, for our industries, but also because you have to walk the walk. You cannot just talk the talk. If you want to convince other nations in Europe that you can deliver, you cannot say, oh, well, sorry, I have a pause now and I don't have the time and you hurry up, but I can't do it. So it's extremely important that Sweden show the way now. And I'm afraid it can only happen, I'm sorry, Christopher, despite you, it can only happen after the elections. And we have to be prepared to make big changes so that we can prove to people that it's cheap to change, and we can prove to industry that Sweden will take a leading role in Europe and give all the instruments for Scania. I'm really worried when you say we don't have enough instruments now in Europe, Lisa. And for the fuel industry, for renewables, we really have to make up for lost time. And I'm really afraid that Sweden cannot have this leadership role in Europe if we continue like we do today. And it's going to be so important for ETS2, for the next steps, and for our competitiveness, for our energy security, and also simply for having the whole global game of climate change end up the way we all hope. So we can't bring you back, Mr. Timmermans, but we can do our part here in Europe. And from there on, I hope for very strong and clear demands from our fellow.
All right, let's turn directly. We'll turn directly to businesses and then back to the politicians. What do we hope for?
We hope that they stick to the targets. In general, I'm really happy with the proposal from Miljömålsberedningen and that there is such great support behind it. I think that's really important to lower capital costs to make sure the direction is clear. And the second one, in Sweden at this moment, we have a lot of electricity production, but still demand hasn't started to take off. So let's focus on you guys when it comes to that. What you need in order to make your investments. So that's the second, so I won't talk for you. And the third one is that the grid needs to keep up. So we need the right conditions to continue to invest in the grid. And also, of course, to use it efficiently. And here we also need to be able to use villkorade avtal, what's that in English? Conditional agreements, where we need legislation to clarify that we can make agreements long-term with the industry. That's a way that also can release a lot of capacity in the grid we already have now today. So I think those are my three biggest
Great ones, one very overarching and several more specific, yes.
Yes, and as I was mentioning before, what we need is really to scale, to roll out these electric trucks that we have developed in Europe and that we now want to sell. And what we need to do in order for that to happen is to stay the course when it comes to EU demands and targets, And on member state level, we have to work with the relative competitiveness of running on fossil fuels versus running on fossil free. Today in Sweden, the total cost of ownership for a fossil-driven truck is cheaper than running on any fossil-free alternative. This is the core of the problem, and there's a lot of things you can do to solve this problem. Either you choose to work on the side of pricing of fossil fuels in order to make them less relatively competitive. I totally understand that there are political challenges to that, but that doesn't mean that you can't win that game, because there is still a lot of opportunity to work on the other side, namely enhancing competitiveness for fossil-free alternatives and lowering the cost of them down to fossil levels. And this is what we haven't been doing during the last couple of years in Sweden. This is where we're lacking right now. And there's a lot of things you can do. You can minimize the tax on energy for charging of heavy trucks. You can introduce a tax deduction for the surplus cost of purchasing a fossil-free transport. You can introduce CO2 differentiated and distance-based road tolls in Sweden, like there are in Denmark and Germany and Switzerland. And you can be way more ambitious when it comes to introducing low-emission zones in cities that drives demand for zero-emission trucks. So there's a lot of things we can work on here. There are a lot of possibilities at hand. Let's just take them and realize this potential. Because do you know, let me just, a very brief one speech. Do you know that almost 40% of all heavy trucks sold in the EU come from Swedish manufacturers, Volvo and Scania? I mean, we are a heavy truck superpower. Let's realize that potential. Let's bring home the benefits of that position.
Thank you, Marlene.
You got the point.
Yeah. Okay. Adjust the support system if needed, but keep the goals. I think that is super important. And also see that globally, it is the low-emission solutions that the markets are after. And see that should we still be relevant in Sweden and in Europe, we need to go that way as well. There we have the competitiveness in those solutions. And I think that you three parties, I like your three parties. I think that this is a good center in the politics. So also have a good dialogue between yourself and see that we can build a strong Sweden and a strong EU on these solutions. And we can do that better if the politics align more, talk more with each other, and are more friendly with each other.
Oh, that's so nice. Several suggestions, hopes, but they all sort of center around stick to the target, stay the course. Jytte, then Martin, then Christopher, and then unfortunately we're out of time.
For me, for us, this is, this is the word we want to hear. So for me, this is great, and it's very different from the message maybe 10 years ago. And now when you have adjusted, invested, want ambitious targets, it is a shame if the politicians would go back, and that's unfortunately what we see. I think it becomes a bit, because you're telling a little bit what I also tried to say, maybe from the political horizon. So I will be short, and that often is appreciated also.
Thank you, Jytte. Martin.
Yeah. No, I think it's as we started with the speech, Mr. Timmermans. It's like tantalizingly close. We're so close. It's so competitive. We have so many advantages. It's getting down in price. It's so close to us, and we have the leadership in automotive, in heavy, in trucks, in renewables in Europe. And still we can't really grasp it. And there I think it's, for us politicians, we have not been good enough. And this election and now forward, we have to show leadership and showing, for example, yes, we have exactly, the program you had on heavy trucks checks pretty much with what we want to do. And of course we want to make a new boost for renewables. And of course we want to have the alternatives when it comes to fuels. and have them for strategic reasons also. So all of this can be done, it's within reach. Now we have to face up to populism. We have to go together, like you did in this commission, but unfortunately it's not affecting policy enough, and dare to put forward the concrete proposals that people can believe in it and can see the future. And I hope let's this be a start now, so that we start changing this, because we've been on a downward trend right now in Sweden when it comes to leadership, and we have to reverse it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Christoph.
I don't really agree, but with that said, though,
you got double mics.
It's fantastic. Oh, sorry. It's fantastic to me. I have so much to say. I need 2 mics. No, it's you know what? Normally, my focus is kindergartens and roundabouts, and trying to become mayor of Stockholm. That's what I'm doing. So a lot of these questions I have to convey to others. But still, setting climate targets and European climate policy is one of my main hobbies. So I'll stick to that to some extent anyhow. But when I look at Sweden's role in this, I must say, it's competitive. Fight for competitiveness. Because I think that's and the best way to do that in this world, I think, is to try to protect as much as we can of globalization and global trade. Because Scania won't be able to, you won't be what you can be if you only supply Europe. And the same goes for almost all European industry. And that's what I think is the main threat. I was so tired spending 15 years in the European Parliament, meeting Swedish politicians saying, as Margot Wallström, I think she coined that, she said, if someone is a Swede, because they always start with saying, in Sweden we have a system, and the rest of the meeting is about making up. But you know what? We have a system when it comes to capital markets in Sweden. And that is an area we should really export, because that, I think, could be a game changer for competitiveness in Europe.
Thank you. Time passes quickly, not only when you're having fun, but also when you're having important. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we realize that we're blessed when we have businesses like you and we have politicians like you. Please give them a warm hand. And we couldn't resist. We're so lucky to have your friends in the room. We're going to ask you to come back up once more, give you final conclusions. I know we're expecting a lot from you, but final words from you to ring in our ears as we leave.
Well, first of all, let me compliment Vattenfall for getting Samuel L. Jackson to do your advertising. And he doesn't even say motherfucker once in the ad, which is quite an achievement for him. So he must be committed to your goals. I would agree that Sweden has a huge potential to educate the rest of Europe on finance. I think that is, your system was born in a very much family-based economy, and that system has a future as a European system, as a global system, I would even say. Secondly, I would also urge Swedish politicians to step more on the European stage. You've always been quite reluctant. True observation, 1 foot in, 1 foot out was always a Swedish way. And just as much as the Dutch, you would step up and say, if only the rest of Europe would be like Sweden, we would be in heaven. And that's what we Dutch always pretend to say as well, until we are educated to understand that that's not how the world works. I also believe it is important to use this new commitment to European unity that I see in Swedish society. You have a collective responsibility as politicians to really work on that. And even, all over Europe, the radical and the extreme right is on a back foot, because they now understand that for the sovereignty they covet, they need Europe. And Europe was their enemy for so long, and they can no longer portray Europe as their enemy. That's a momentous moment for us as pro-European politicians to not let go by without trying to use it and help our population understand that we need Europe more than we do ever before. And if I may just end on this, because this is not the topic for today, but day and night I worry for our European neighbor Ukraine that risks being totally annihilated by Putin, that will have to struggle to keep its integrity as a territorium. And whatever happens there is going to determine our future. And I have to say that if we can create, I haven't spoken about this, I should have, if we can create an energy union which incorporates not just the EU member states, but also Norway, the United Kingdom and Ukraine, we will be so strong in renewables and also in the alternative to renewables that we will need for baseload for quite a long time, which are probably mainly going to be natural gas. We can be so strong in these areas and in biofuels. Just look at the potential of Ukraine. And then, again, we can be so strong because these people, these countries, it starts in Germany, but it gets more intensive in Poland and in Ukraine, are so engineer-heavy. They have so many talented engineers. They can help us shape the industry of the future. So the capital thinking about by Sweden, combined with the engineering audacity of Eastern Europe, could make Europe into a powerhouse. I'm not naive about China. Let me end on that. I fully understand the challenge of China, but if we don't speed up our transition in automotive, we can only buy Chinese vehicles in the future, and that would be a huge, huge deterrent to our economy. We have everything to win. We have all the conditions to be successful. We have to overcome our divisions. That's the only real challenge we need to overcome to be successful. Thank you very much.
Frans Timmermans, this afternoon session was in your honor, but we feel also incredibly honored by your presence, so incredibly inspired by your work and your words. One last round of applause and then this session is over. Thank you once again so much. Thank you, amazing.